Sometimes you have to look at a player who's been carrying your team all season and say, what is going on? We're going to look at some all stars, breakouts, fantasy studs that are just not cutting it anymore. What do you do and should you panic? And believe it or not, we've got a pair of Orioles on the list today. But first, let's start with a guy who's been all in the news lately and might start to fade from the spotlight. Guy who did not get traded to a contender, that's Garrett Crochet. And he's also gone from fantasy stud and one of the best starting pitchers in all of fantasy to a guy that now you wonder if you even keep him in your rotation. So, first, let's address the obvious. Still with the White Sox, didn't get moved to the Dodgers or anywhere else. And so, yeah, those wins aren't going to see an uptick. Okay, fine. But he hasn't been on a good team all year, and he's still been a stud because he's been leading the majors in strikeouts, great ratios, going deep into games, but not lately. And that's the problem. So, first, let's get the obvious question out of the way. Is he going to even be a starter the rest of the way? We know Crochet is already well blown past his previous career high of innings pitched in the season a long time ago because, let's face it, he has had so many injuries in his past and he was a reliever. This is the first time even being used as a starting pitcher, much less a guy going this deep into the season. What we saw leading up to the last couple of weeks of the trade deadline was that his innings were limited, and that made sense. It seemed like it was just because they want to keep him nice and safe and bubble wrapped for any team that wants to trade for him. Don't want to risk an injury. But that's gone now. Trade deadline is over. He stayed put, and his last start since the trade deadline passed, he still only went 4 innings. But he did start, and we know one of the things he demanded, which may also be part of the reason he didn't get traded, was that if he went somewhere, anywhere, he stay in the rotation, not go to the bullpen. And the White Sox have said he is going to stay in the rotation. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that. He's still going to be a starter. Now, what about potentially getting shut down completely? Well, the White Sox have said they're not going to do that either. But they did not say that they're not going to limit or restrict his innings. And that's the reason to panic here is because we don't have to worry about him being preserved for a trade. And even after that, in August 3rd, his last start only lasted 4 innings and he wasn't really bad. It's not like, he was getting lit up or anything. He only gave up 1 run and a hit. He did walk 4 batters and his control wasn't great. So the pitch count kind of got high, but we're not talking 90, 100 pitches here. So now you've got to wonder, is he going to be on some sort of a restriction every time out the rest of the way? And I think the answer, it seems like it's obviously a yes. And we're talking June 30th. That's the last time he went more than 4 innings in a start. So even if Crochet continues to be just as effective as he has been, we're talking about a team that is basically a dumpster fire now. The wins are going to be hard to come by. And, well, if you don't go 5 innings in a game, it's impossible to get a win and forget quality starts. So while I do advise selling, I can't even say high, but just selling it all if possible on Garrett Crochet while you can. I mean, the sell high window closed weeks ago, but it still might be a good idea if you can sell them to somebody because, again, 4 innings at a time, it's just not going to cut it. But I don't recommend dropping him. I'll say overall, my panic meter for Crochet in terms of the rest of the season at fantasy value, it's at an 8, and that might even be generous. It could be higher. But it's not like he's worthless. Even if this guy just goes 3, 4 innings, he still gets you some strikeouts. He still should be good in terms of the ratio help. So he's not worthless. He's just far less valuable than he was a month ago. And the same could go for this year's other breakout pitcher in the AL, Tanner Houck of the Boston Red Sox. This guy's just been a stud all year until the last couple of weeks, and this has nothing to do with trade rumors or the team or anything. Nothing has changed there except he just hasn't been as effective. Like, he was a stud. His ERA didn't even reach over 2 until the middle of June. But since then, it kind of keeps slowly climbing. Now we see that area is above 3, and that's because in his last 3 starts, he's allowed 13 runs over 17 innings pitched. And it's showing up in the command too. This is the real sticking point here. You've got to look at his strikeout rate. Wasn't really great to begin with, but it is dropping, and the command is wavering over those last 3 starts. 11 strikeouts and 9 walks over 17 innings. Now, Hauk is not the same as Crochet. It's not a guy who's only been out of the bullpen, but he's never really been, over the course of a full season, a starter who's gone this many innings as he's projected to get by year's end. So there has to be a question of whether he might be, hitting some fatigue, getting to that wall, so to speak. It just looks like he's not the same pitcher anymore. And it's been a little bit more gradual to recently, so it might be hard to even figure out that that's what's happening, but we see it happen all the time. So am I panicked with Hauk? Sort of. I'll say I'll put the meter at a 7 right now. He's not a guy I want to drop. And, we've had some people say they were able to pick him up because he was dropped in their league. I would pick him up because this isn't something where it's clearly obvious that he's just tanked completely. This isn't like a Jordan Hicks situation, a guy who is probably not even going to start another game the rest of the season. And if so, you don't want him out there. I don't think it's that bad. But you have to admit, you're probably not getting what you did out of him from April and May going forward in August, September. All right, now onto those Orioles. Here's a standout at his position, arguably now the best catcher in the game, Adley Rushman. Why should we worry about him? Well, his game has definitely fallen off, especially over the last month. In the month of July, he only hit 132 with a total of 6 runs batted in. That's very unusual for a guy who's hitting in the heart of that Orioles lineup. And the last 2 weeks, really not much better, only 143 batting average. And there are other little signs here. I mean, sure, every hitter goes through slumps, but you might notice, especially if you've got Rushman, he's been sitting more often. I mean, this is one of the few catchers who's out there almost every day, but just over the past week, he hasn't started on 3 occasions. And the offense is starting to disappear. What about his defense, which he's also acclaimed for? On Sunday against the Cleveland Guardians, they were able to steal 5 bases off of him. That's, kind of embarrassing for a catcher, but, for a guy who's got this kind of reputation that Rushman does, that's something that is definitely raising an eyebrow. So is this an extended funk? Is this something where we're going to see him start to also kind of fall off? No, I don't think so. With all of that said, look, he's too talented a player. He's in too good of a team, but also it's not like he's never, gone this late in the season with this many at bats before. He did it last year. And also, he is starting to slowly pick it up. I don't know, it's just on Sunday, although Cleveland was running wild on him, he had 3 RBIs in a 2-for-4 game. In August, he already has 6 RBIs. That means he's matched his whole July total in just the first 4 days of this month. Look, he'll be fine. Not worried at all here. If you have Rushman, just be glad you have a catcher of his caliber. Now, you can't say the same for his teammate, Craig Kimbrell, who maybe is the closer still. Not quite sure because with him, it's always back and forth. Look, he hasn't been good lately. He hasn't got many saves all lately. And Yennier Cano was the last Oriole to pick up a save. Is this going to continue the rest of the season? The last time Kimbrell notched a save was July 7th. But we've been through this before. In fact, just this season in Baltimore, Kimbrell went through a stretch where he wasn't effective, kind of lost that ninth inning role, and then got it back. And really on the season, his numbers are pretty good. I mean, for any reliever, 3.29 ERA, 1.15 whip, and the strikeouts are definitely still there. In fact, 98th percentile strikeout rate. He's still got his stuff. And you look at his numbers, they're almost identical to the last 2 seasons. That said, you do still have to be worried about a closer who's not getting saves, right? Regardless of the situation. And they do have guys who can step up, or at least a guy in Cano. But I think he gets that job back eventually, and he still does have value, even if you're not in a league that does count holds. And obviously, if you're in a league that counts either saves and holds or just holds, Kimbrell definitely someone you got to keep. But even if you're just looking for saves, I think Kimbrell will still get you a few the rest of the way. He's still getting you those strikeouts, so don't give up here. Yes, I'm worried, but my panic level is about a 7. I am less optimistic about another closer who officially has lost his job. That's Paul Sewald of the Diamondbacks. Manager Torey Lovullo announced that Sewald will be removed from that ninth inning role, and he wasn't kidding. In fact, just on Sunday, Sewald pitched in the 6th inning. And not surprisingly, it was AJ Puck, their new acquisition at the trade deadline, who did pick up the save. And it's not just Puck. Now, this could be a full blown committee or something because the other day, Ryan Thompson was deployed in a save situation. So we could see all of these guys in the mix, and we could see Seawall at some point back. But again, a committee is never a great thing for a closer because you don't know whether to rely on him or not. You don't know whether to keep him in your lineup or not. You don't know if he's really going to get any saves down the stretch. And obviously, they brought in Puck for a reason. I'll also say that while Seawald did see his ERA climb a lot, he hasn't really pitched that many innings, so it's easy to say that this has been skewed. But obviously, they got tired of him not getting the job done. He had allowed runs in 3 of his last 5 games until this past sixth inning appearance. So he just hadn't really been reliable enough, but it's not like he's been terrible. I think by the time we get to, let's say, September and the stretch run and maybe your fantasy playoffs, look, it wouldn't shock me if Seawald is the guy again. It's kind of ironic that Thompson was the guy who was put in the ninth inning when on the season, Paul Seawald has 4 blown saves. It's not that bad. Ryan Thompson has 5 blown saves. Is this guy really more reliable? AJ Puck, remember early in the year, was terrible. He just finally turned it around over the past month. So this is probably going to be a mix and match situation. But again, right now, if you've got Paul Seawald, yes, you should be worried. I wouldn't drop him yet unless you're in a shallow league, but the panic meter is at a 9. And another breakout player this year who is a waiver wire savior, possibly, but now Helio Ramos is starting to get dropped in leagues because not only is he starting to slump, but there's an injury at play, which might explain why that power's disappeared. Ramos only has 1 home run in the past 3 weeks, and he's seen that batting average start to drop as well. He's only 3 for his last 21, and that's despite the fact that the Giants have a really cush schedule lately. They've played teams like Oakland, Cincinnati, and Colorado, but he's just going downhill. Now, it's because he's got some thumb soreness, some swelling there. Obviously, that hurts a player not just with their swing, but especially with their power. So it's understandable. This is also reason to be concerned. He hasn't hit the IL as of right now, but he could see more days off. He just sat on Sunday, didn't play. If he starts to miss more games, I understand it. If you're in a 12 team or especially a 10-team league, you could drop him, but this doesn't sound like something too serious unless we hear some sort of other injury or setback. I think he's still worth just stashing on your bench. Can't say I have no concern here, obviously, because this is a guy who kind of just finally showed up this year. It's not a sure thing that he delivers the rest of the year. You're kind of always waiting for one of these players to start going into one of these slumps, right? But in this case, it's excusable, it's understandable with that thumb injury. So I think I'll be patient here and hold on to him for now. Those are the players you might consider benching or cutting this week because they are struggling. These are the players you should consider adding if you need help.